The planet Xerion had been at war for as long as anyone could remember. Factions of aliens fought for land, for pride, for resources, and for reasons that often seemed smaller than the cost in lives. Princess Lyra, the youngest daughter of Queen Saria, had grown up hearing the cries of war and the sound of battles echoing across the cities and valleys. She had never known peace, only strategy meetings, warnings, and lessons on how to survive in a world where strength ruled. Yet today was different. Today, Lyra was not a princess preparing for war. Today, she was preparing to meet the humans. After decades of tension, the Alien Council had agreed to open talks with Earth, a planet far away but powerful in ways Xerion could not ignore. Lyra had been chosen not just as a diplomat, but as a symbol of hope. Her presence was meant to show that the aliens were willing to trust, even if only slightly, a species that was strange, unpredictable, and entirely unknown. Lyra's shuttle descended onto the human base with a quiet hum. She looked out the window at the strange planet below, noting the blue oceans, green lands, and cities that stretched far into the distance. Humans moved in organized patterns unlike the chaotic bustle of Xerion's settlements. Even from this height, Lyra could see the difference. Humans were smaller, weaker in appearance, but there was something in their presence, a kind of quiet confidence that made her chest tighten with curiosity. When she stepped out of her shuttle, Lyra felt the eyes of dozens of humans upon her. They were cautious, whispering to one another, unsure how to react to a creature from another world. Lyra's scales shimmered under the sunlight, and her tall, lithe form moved with a grace that made humans stop and stare. But she kept her focus. She was not here to impress. She was here to observe, to understand, and to make the first move toward peace. Her attention turned to the human chosen to meet her, Captain Ethan Cole. He stood apart from the others, his posture straight, his eyes calm yet alert. There was no fear in his gaze, no hesitation, only a quiet certainty that made Lyra pause. She had been trained to expect warriors who would either be aggressive or cowardly, but Ethan was neither. He was human, yes, but there was something about him that suggested he understood more than just tactics. He understood people. Their first words were simple. An interpreter translated their greetings, and Lyra noted the careful way Ethan spoke. He did not rush, he did not try to impress, but each word was measured and respectful. Lyra was surprised at how easy it was to understand him, even with the barrier of language and culture. Over the course of the meeting, she watched him navigate questions from the council with skill and patience. When tensions rose, he did not raise his voice. When disagreements flared, he did not argue but listened. Lyra could not help but feel a flicker of respect for him. This human, smaller and weaker in appearance, was more capable than many alien generals she had met, and yet she reminded herself, she was here to represent her people, not to admire him. The council was watching. The humans were watching, and the fate of two worlds rested on these first steps. By the end of the day, a proposal was made. To secure peace between humans and Xerion, a union would be formed. Princess Lyra would wed Captain Ethan Cole. It was a shocking idea, one that many on both sides questioned. How could a human and an alien possibly maintain peace? Would this truly stop wars, or would it create new conflicts? But the leaders believed in the power of symbol, in the strength of alliance. Lyra was to be the bridge, and Ethan the human chosen to walk it with her. Lyra felt a mixture of duty and unease. She was not naive. She knew marriage was a serious step, not a tool to be used lightly. Yet she also understood the importance of her role. Wars could end, blood could stop flowing, and generations could be spared if this worked. She had trained her whole life for moments of decision, and this was perhaps the most critical of all. The first days of preparation for the union were tense. Lyra and Ethan spent hours together, learning each other's languages, customs, and expectations. Lyra was fascinated by Ethan's human ways, the simple gestures of kindness, the humor hidden in his words, and the way he treated every being with respect. She noticed how he adapted quickly, not just to her world, but to the expectations placed upon him. He asked questions, he observed, he listened. One evening, Lyra asked him about Earth, about the humans he commanded, and about the wars they had fought. Ethan spoke honestly, not hiding fear nor exaggerating victories. He told her about human strengths, their mistakes, and their hope. He admitted that he did not fully understand Xerion yet, but he was willing to learn. Lyra felt a connection forming, Not romantic yet, but rooted in trust and mutual understanding. She had met many beings, alien and human alike, but Ethan was different. Tensions arose when minor skirmishes were reported near Zirian's borders. Lyra feared that these incidents might undermine the peace before it even began. She worried that the Council would lose faith, that the humans would doubt her judgment, or that Ethan might falter under pressure. But he did not. He calmly analyzed each situation, suggesting solutions that were fair, strategic, and nonviolent. Lyra observed, impressed, as humans and aliens began to see the potential in his methods. By the time the wedding day approached, Lyra no longer saw Ethan as just a human soldier. She saw a partner, someone who could walk beside her in the most difficult times. She did not yet love him in the way she imagined love, but she respected him deeply, and in that respect she found hope. A hope that peace was possible, that a human and an alien could do what others had failed to do for centuries. The ceremony itself was unlike any Lyra had attended. Aliens from rival factions watched carefully, humans whispered nervously, and yet in the midst of all the tension there was a strange calm. Ethan stood beside her, offering a gesture of greeting to the crowd, a small smile that seemed to ease the tension in the room. Lyra took his hand, feeling the warmth of human skin against her own. A simple reminder that despite differences, connection was possible. As the sun set over the alien city, Lyra looked at Ethan and knew that this was only the beginning. Wars would not end overnight and skepticism would not vanish in a day. But with him by her side, she believed that peace, long thought impossible, might just have a chance. And little did anyone know, the human beside her held a power no alien had ever seen. A power that would change their world forever. After the wedding, life on Zirian began to shift. The palace, once tense with suspicion and rivalry, now buzzed with cautious optimism. Aliens from different factions observed the union of Princess Lyra and Captain Ethan Cole closely. Some whispered doubts while others nodded in quiet approval. Humans, too, were amazed at the beauty and complexity of Zirian's world, its towering spires, shimmering cities, and strange, glowing forests. Lyra and Ethan spent their days learning from one another. She introduced him to alien traditions, showing him how decisions were made, how respect was given, and how power was understood among her people. Ethan, in turn, shared human ways of thinking, strategies based on observation, logic, and collaboration rather than only force. He had a remarkable ability to see problems from all angles, and slowly, the alien council began to notice. One morning, a warning arrived from the borders of Zirian. Skirmishes had erupted between two factions who had not agreed to the peace. Scouts reported that the conflict was growing, and some feared it could escalate into full-scale war. Lyra's heart sank. She had hoped that her marriage would immediately create stability, but reality was more complicated. Ethan, however, remained calm. He listened to the reports carefully, asked questions about both sides, and studied maps of the area. He did not rush to action or anger. Instead, he proposed a plan that surprised even the oldest council members. Ethan suggested sending negotiators first, using mediators trained in both human and alien customs. He outlined a sequence of steps: talk, observe, understand the motivations, and only then act to prevent harm. His approach was unusual. Aliens were used to force, intimidation, and demonstrations of power. Humans were often seen as clever, yes, but weak. Yet Ethan's method combined cleverness with patience, and the council could see the wisdom in it. Lyra accompanied Ethan to the disputed territory. As they approached, the air shimmered with tension. Alien warriors lined the cliffs, weapons ready, eyes narrowed. Humans on the other side mirrored their stance, unsure how to act in an alien world. Lyra's palms sweated and her heart beat quickly. For the first time, she felt fear, not for herself, but for Ethan. She had seen human soldiers in battle, but she had never seen them in situations like this, facing thousands of hostile aliens who had never met him before. Ethan stepped forward calmly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. His voice, though amplified by alien technology, was soft yet firm. He spoke not as a conqueror, not as a judge, but as someone willing to understand both sides. He asked questions, listened carefully, and repeated back what he heard to show that he understood. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The aliens, accustomed to quick decisions through force, were amazed that a human could resolve conflict with words, patience, and insight. Princess Lyra watched silently, her respect for Ethan growing with every passing moment. He was small compared to the towering alien warriors, but his presence carried a weight that no weapon could match. He did not rely on strength, intimidation, or threats. He relied on understanding, logic, and empathy. For the first time, she realized that this was the true power he possessed, the power to see solutions others could not, the power to unite without violence. The negotiations lasted for hours. There were moments of tension when tempers flared, when one faction tried to provoke another. Ethan did not react with anger. Instead, he redirected the conversation, asked thoughtful questions, and reminded both sides of the greater goal: survival, peace, and the future of Xirion. By evening, the factions agreed to a temporary truce, with promises to meet again for longer negotiations. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Lyra felt a spark of hope she had not felt in years. Returning to the palace, the council praised Ethan's approach. Some elders were skeptical, but even they could not deny the results. Aliens who had doubted the Union now began to see humans in a new light. Perhaps there was more to their strength than physical power. Perhaps humans had a wisdom that could help Xirion survive and prosper. In the following days, small but significant changes began to appear. Trade routes that had been blocked by war reopened. Messages of cooperation arrived from previously hostile factions. Citizens began to speak with less fear and more curiosity about humans. Lyra noticed that soldiers who had once been ready to fight were now watching Ethan, learning from his methods and even imitating his calm demeanor. Despite these successes, challenges remained. Some factions still resisted, and not every alien was willing to accept the new order. Rumors spread that certain leaders were plotting against the peace, fearing loss of power. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that failure could mean a return to war. Ethan, however, remained steadfast. He spent long hours studying alien history, technology, and politics. He asked questions, observed patterns, and developed strategies that were subtle yet effective. One evening, while walking in the palace gardens, Lyra asked him about his confidence. "How do you stay so calm when so many depend on you?" she asked. Ethan looked at her with a quiet smile. "I pay attention," he said. "I watch, I listen, and I think before I act. Strength is not only about fighting. It is about knowing when to speak, when to wait, and how to understand others. That is what changes minds, and sometimes that is more powerful than any weapon." Lyra nodded, realizing the truth in his words. She had seen leaders wield power through force and fear, but Ethan had a different kind of influence, one that inspired trust, curiosity, and respect. It was a power that no alien had ever seen before, a power that could unite worlds. As the days passed, Lyra and Ethan worked side by side. Their partnership grew stronger, not just through duty but through shared understanding and mutual respect. They faced challenges together, solved conflicts, and slowly, the idea of war began to fade. Aliens began to speak of peace as something achievable, and humans became more than visitors. They became part of Xirion's story. By the end of the second part of their journey, Lyra understood that her marriage had become more than a symbol. It was the beginning of a transformation that would show Xirion and the universe that true strength could come from understanding, patience, and intelligence. And in the quiet moments when the stars shone above the palace, she began to feel something else, a quiet admiration, a growing trust, and the faintest hint of something deeper for the human who had changed her world without lifting a weapon. Months had passed since Princess Lyra and Captain Ethan Cole had united their worlds through marriage. Life on Xirion was slowly changing, but peace was fragile. While some factions began to accept the new order, others grew restless. They saw the human not as a partner, but as a threat. They whispered among themselves, plotting to test him, to see if he truly had the power his actions suggested. One morning, a council member delivered troubling news. A border faction, known for its aggressive behavior, had gathered troops near a key trade route. They demanded recognition of their power, threatening to disrupt the fragile peace. Lyra felt a wave of anxiety. She knew that any misstep could undo all the progress they had made. She glanced at Ethan, who studied the report quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. "This situation needs careful handling," Ethan said calmly. Rushing in with force could escalate conflict. We need to understand their motivations first. Lyra nodded. She had learned by now that his calm approach was not indecision. It was strategy. The humans and aliens accompanying them prepared for travel, while Ethan mapped out every possible scenario. He spent hours studying the faction's history, alliances, and previous conflicts. Lyra watched him, fascinated at how he absorbed information so quickly and predicted outcomes with accuracy. She had never seen anyone, human or alien, do this before. When they arrived at the border, the tension was palpable. Alien warriors lined the cliffs, their eyes sharp, their weapons ready. Lyra's pulse quickened. She had faced many tense situations, but this felt different. Ethan stepped forward as he always did, with a calm presence that seemed to steady everyone around him. He addressed the alien commander directly, speaking slowly and clearly, using both their language and interpreters. "Your concerns are heard," Ethan said. "We are not here to take what belongs to you. We are here to find a solution that protects all sides. Let us talk." The commander sneered. "Talk is useless. Humans cannot understand our strength. You are small, weak, and untested." Ethan did not flinch. Instead, he asked questions, listened, and repeated back what he understood. He acknowledged the commander's concerns, showing that he respected their perspective even while refusing to be intimidated. Slowly, he began to offer solutions, compromises, that allowed the faction to feel secure while preventing unnecessary conflict. Lyra watched in awe as Ethan's influence grew. His power was not physical, but it was undeniable. Aliens who had expected threats and weapons now listened attentively. Humans who had feared for their safety began to relax, seeing that Ethan's intellect and calm approach were stronger than the bravest soldier's sword. The turning point came when the commander tried a test. He signaled a small group to advance aggressively, as if to provoke Ethan into action. Lyra's heart leapt in fear. She knew that any wrong move could spark a battle, but Ethan did not react with force. He predicted their movements, calmly guiding his allies to positions that minimized risk. He spoke to the advancing group, offering them a way to step back without losing face. Amazingly, they complied. The council members, observing from a distance, whispered among themselves. No human, or alien for that matter, had ever handled such a situation without violence. Ethan's approach had diffused danger, protected lives, and earned respect in a single demonstration. Lyra felt a mixture of pride and relief. She realized that this human who had married her for duty was already shaping history in ways she could never have imagined. Returning to the palace, news of Ethan's success spread quickly. Aliens who had doubted him began to reconsider. Trade routes remained secure, and border tensions eased. The once hostile faction sent envoys to thank him for his fairness and foresight. Lyra saw how the human had begun to change not just her world, but the perceptions and attitudes of the entire planet. Even within the palace walls, Ethan's influence was growing. He helped solve disputes among the council members, suggested improvements in city planning, and mediated conflicts between factions. Lyra observed how aliens who had once been skeptical now sought his advice. He seemed to have a talent for seeing what others could not, understanding intentions, and finding solutions that avoided harm while strengthening alliances. One evening, Lyra and Ethan walked through the palace gardens. The twin moons of Xerion reflected on the shimmering leaves, casting a gentle light around them. Lyra felt a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Ethan," she said quietly, "how do you do it? How do you stay so calm, so certain, even when everyone is against you?" He smiled, looking at her with warmth. "I don't have all the answers," he replied. "But I pay attention. I notice patterns, I watch people, and I try to understand what they want and why. Strength is not about force. It's about knowledge, patience, and using what you know wisely. That is something no weapon can replace." Lyra nodded, realizing the truth in his words. She had grown up in a world where power was shown through dominance, strength, and fear. Yet here was a human, small in appearance, changing minds, hearts, and even entire factions without a single display of physical force. His power was quiet, subtle, and brilliant, and it was far stronger than she had ever imagined. In the following weeks, more challenges arose. Factions resistant to peace attempted subtle sabotage, spreading rumors and creating minor incidents to test Ethan's abilities. Each time he handled the situation with care. He listened, analyzed, and responded in ways that minimized conflict and reinforced trust. Lyra watched closely, knowing that these moments would define the future of Xerion. Slowly, the alien population began to accept the humans as allies. Soldiers who had once prepared for war now observed Ethan's methods, learning from his calm and clever approach. Citizens spoke with curiosity and hope, wondering if peace might finally be possible. And Princess Lyra, who had married for duty, found herself inspired by the human beside her, not only for his skills but for his integrity, courage, and wisdom. By the end of Part 3, it was clear that Ethan's presence had shifted the balance of power on Xerion. He had not used weapons or brute force, yet he commanded respect and influence in a way that no alien had ever seen. The planet began to glimpse a new future, one where understanding and insight could replace conflict and fear. Lyra knew that the journey was far from over. Greater challenges awaited, and some factions still resisted change. But she also knew that with Ethan's unique power beside her, she could face the future with hope. Together, they were more than a symbol of peace. They were the force that could shape the destiny of an entire world. Months passed, and the influence of Princess Lyra and Captain Ethan Cole grew stronger across Xerion. Word of the humans' unique abilities had spread to every corner of the planet. Aliens who had once doubted the Union now began to approach the palace with curiosity and respect. Some came with questions, some with requests, and others with cautious admiration. They wanted to see the human who could solve problems without a single weapon, a human whose mind had changed the fate of an entire planet. Lyra watched Ethan closely. Every day she saw him face situations that would have overwhelmed others. Rival factions came to challenge him with disputes over trade, land, or even ancient traditions. Yet Ethan met each challenge with patience, clarity, and insight. He listened, carefully analyzed the information, and suggested solutions that satisfied both sides. Aliens began to realize that his power was unlike any other. They had expected strength, force, or intimidation. Instead, Ethan wielded knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and it worked far better than any weapon. One morning, a new challenge arose. A high council meeting was called, and leaders from all major factions arrived at the palace. The room was tense. Many had resisted peace for decades, and the humans' presence still caused whispers. Some factions had ignored earlier agreements, and disputes threatened to undo the fragile progress. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. If Ethan could not handle this, years of work might vanish in an instant. Ethan entered the chamber calmly, his posture steady, and his eyes observing every detail. He greeted each leader with respect, listening to their concerns before speaking. One of the most powerful leaders, Lord Corinne, demanded that the humans leave, claiming they did not belong on Xerion. He reminded everyone that humans were small, inexperienced, and untested. Many in the room nodded in agreement, but Ethan did not flinch. "I am here not to replace anyone," he said in a clear voice. "I am here to listen, to understand, and to help find solutions that respect all of you. Strength is not measured by size or weapons. It is measured by knowledge, patience, and the ability to act wisely. Together we can prevent conflicts that have lasted generations." The room fell silent. No alien had ever spoken to the council with such confidence, clarity, and respect. Ethan began asking questions about each faction's needs, goals, and fears. He carefully recorded their responses, repeating what he heard to ensure understanding. Slowly, the council members realized that he was not challenging them, but guiding them. Hours passed as Ethan mediated disputes, offered compromises, and solved misunderstandings. Lyra watched him, amazed. Every suggestion he made seemed simple, yet each was carefully calculated to satisfy all parties. Factions that had been on the verge of conflict now began to nod, and some even smiled quietly at the humans' cleverness. During a break, Lyra approached Ethan. "You are doing what no alien has ever done," she said softly. "You are earning respect not with power, but with your mind. It is incredible." Ethan looked at her and smiled. "Power is not always what it seems," he replied. "Aliens respect strength, yes, but understanding and trust can achieve far more than force ever could. We must show them that peace is stronger than fear." By the end of the day, the council meeting had concluded with new agreements. Disputes were resolved, trade routes were opened, and factions promised to collaborate on joint projects. The once hostile Lord Corinne even extended a hand to Ethan, a gesture of respect that shocked the assembly. Lyra felt a surge of pride. She realized that the human she had married not only fulfilled his duty, but was changing Xerion in ways she had never imagined. Ethan's influence did not stop at the council. Over the next weeks, he worked closely with engineers, scientists, and community leaders. He helped repair ancient infrastructure, suggested improvements to water distribution, and mediated conflicts among citizens. Aliens began to see humans as allies, and trust slowly grew between species that had once been enemies. Lyra observed that his presence alone seemed to calm disputes and encourage cooperation. One day, news arrived that a minor faction had been sabotaging a trade route, attempting to provoke the council and disrupt peace. Lyra feared this might be a turning point, a chance for chaos to return, but Ethan remained calm. He reviewed the situation, studied the motivations behind the sabotage, and traveled to the area with a team of neutral mediators. There he spoke with the faction leaders, listened to their grievances, and proposed solutions that addressed their concerns without punishing them harshly. The result was astonishing. The faction agreed to collaborate, repaired the damage, and even sent a message of thanks to the palace. Lyra marveled at Ethan's ability to turn potential enemies into allies. No alien had ever demonstrated this kind of power before. It was subtle, quiet, yet undeniable. It was the kind of influence that changed minds, hearts, and entire communities without violence. In the evenings, Lyra often walked with Ethan in the palace gardens. The twin moons of Xerion reflected on, the shimmering leaves casting silver light over the paths. "Do you realize what you are doing?" she asked one night. "You are showing everyone that a human can lead, influence, and protect in ways we never imagined. You are changing history." Ethan smiled, looking at her with quiet humility. "I am not trying to change history," he said. "I am trying to help. I am trying to show that peace is possible if we listen, understand, and act wisely. That is all. Everything else follows." Lyra understood, but she also understood more than ever the depth of his power. It was not in fighting, weapons, or dominance. It was in wisdom, empathy, and the ability to think beyond immediate gain. She realized that Xerion had witnessed something extraordinary, the rise of a leader whose strength was invisible, yet stronger than any army. As weeks turned into months, Ethan continued to build trust across Xerion. Alien factions that had resisted for centuries now sought his guidance. Humans and aliens worked together on projects that had seemed impossible before. Lyra saw that the planet was changing, slowly but steadily under the quiet influence of the human she had married. By the end of Part 4, it was clear that Ethan's power had reached even the highest leaders. His influence extended beyond the council and the palace. It touched citizens, soldiers, and rulers alike. He had demonstrated that strength could take many forms, and that intelligence, patience, and empathy were perhaps the greatest powers of all. Lyra, once a princess bound by duty, now stood beside a partner whose abilities went far beyond what she had ever imagined. Together, they had not only maintained peace, they had begun to reshape the entire planet. And as Xerion looked to the future, one thing was certain. The human beside Princess Lyra was no ordinary being. He was a force of change, a power no alien had ever seen before, and the story of his influence was only beginning. The seasons changed on Xerion, and with them the world began to breathe in a new way. The cities that had once been tense and cautious now carried a sense of hope. Aliens and humans moved through streets that were quieter, safer, and alive with cooperation. Trade flourished, communication improved, and for the first time in centuries, Xerion knew something it had not felt before: peace. Princess Lyra stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the activity below. Citizens of all species moved with purpose, sharing ideas, goods, and laughter. Soldiers from rival factions walked side by side, training together, learning from one another. Even the children of the city, who had grown up with fear, now played in open fields without worry. Lyra's heart swelled with pride. She had married for duty, to create peace, but the man beside her had turned duty into legacy. Captain Ethan Cole joined her silently. He looked down at the bustling city with calm eyes, as though assessing every detail, yet also appreciating the beauty of the moment. Lyra turned to him. "Look at this," she said softly. "It's more than I imagined possible." "You've changed everything." Ethan smiled faintly. "I did not do this alone," he said. "You chose to trust me, to walk beside me. We did this together. But yes, it is good to see the results of careful planning, patience, and understanding." The palace had become a center of diplomacy and cooperation. Leaders from once opposed factions now traveled there regularly, seeking guidance and collaboration. Trade agreements, technology sharing, and joint projects were underway. Even the citizens had begun to embrace the idea that humans and aliens could coexist, work together, and thrive as a single community. Yet challenges remained. Not every faction had fully accepted the peace. Some leaders remained cautious, testing boundaries and creating situations that required careful navigation. Lyra knew that if these factions were ignored or mishandled, the progress they had made could unravel. Ethan, however, handled each situation with the same steady intelligence he had always shown. One day, a delegation arrived from a distant region of Xerion. Their faction had been at war with others for decades, and had resisted the union between humans and aliens. They carried complaints about trade disagreements, territorial disputes, and old grudges. Lyra felt the familiar tension rise in her chest, but Ethan remained calm. He studied the delegation carefully, listening to every word, observing every gesture. Then, without anger or threat, he addressed their concerns. He proposed a plan that acknowledged their fears, offered solutions to long-standing problems, and invited them to collaborate with other factions on shared projects. Slowly, the delegation's leaders began to nod, realizing that the human beside Princess Lyra understood them better than anyone had before. By the end of the day, the delegation agreed to join the cooperative effort. Lyra could hardly contain her awe. A faction that had resisted peace for generations now accepted it, not because of weapons, not because of force, but because of understanding, clever strategy, and patience. The story of Ethan's influence spread quickly. Aliens spoke of the human who could solve problems without aggression, who earned respect through wisdom rather than intimidation. Even the most skeptical leaders began to see the value of his approach. Lyra realized that his power was not extraordinary in the way she had first imagined. It was extraordinary in its quiet strength, in its ability to unite, guide, and inspire. At the same time, life within the palace took on a new rhythm. Lyra and Ethan continued to walk side by side, sharing thoughts, learning from each other, and planning the future. Lyra noticed that her admiration for him had grown deeper. Respect had turned into trust, and trust into genuine affection. She saw in him not only a partner in duty, but a companion in life, a human whose insight and wisdom had reshaped an entire world. One evening, as the twin moons cast silver light over the palace gardens, Lyra spoke quietly. "Do you realize what you have done, Ethan? You've not only maintained peace, you've created a future that no one thought possible. You've given Xerion hope, and more than that, you've given me hope too." Ethan looked at her with his familiar calm smile. "I only did what I could," he replied. "You trusted me. You guided me. And together we built something stronger than fear. That is all I could ask." In the weeks that followed, Xerion entered a period of unprecedented growth. Factions that had once fought now shared resources and ideas. Citizens celebrated festivals together, honoring traditions from multiple cultures. Children learned both human and alien ways, growing up with curiosity rather than suspicion. Lyra often walked among them, observing the harmony and marveling at the transformation. Even the Council of Leaders acknowledged the change. Meetings that had once been tense and combative now involved discussion, collaboration, and mutual respect. Ethan's methods of negotiation, understanding, and careful planning were adopted widely. Leaders began to emulate his approach, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the palace walls. Lyra realized that the human she had married was no ordinary partner. His power was subtle, unseen by those who expected violence, but undeniable in its results. He had shown that strength was not always physical, that leadership could come from patience, knowledge, and empathy. No alien had ever witnessed such a combination before, and the results were clear. A planet once divided by war now moved toward unity. In quiet moments, Lyra and Ethan often reflected on their journey. They spoke of challenges overcome, lessons learned, and the long road still ahead. Lyra felt gratitude, admiration, and a growing warmth in her heart. She understood now that her marriage had begun as a duty, but it had grown into something far greater, a partnership that reshaped history. As the sun rose over Zirion, Lyra stood beside Ethan on the palace balcony, looking out at the world they had helped create. The cities sparkled, trade routes hummed with activity, and citizens moved with purpose and joy. For the first time in centuries, the planet felt truly alive. Lyra turned to Ethan and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. "Peace is real, and it feels alive." Ethan took her hand gently. "It is real because we work together," he replied. "And it will last as long as we continue to understand each other and guide those around us. That is the true power of this union." Princess Lyra looked out at the horizon, realizing the full impact of their journey. They had not just maintained peace, they had changed the very way Zirion saw itself. Aliens who had doubted humans now trusted them. Humans had shown courage, intelligence, and wisdom. Together they had proven that understanding, patience, and insight were the most powerful forces of all. And so, with the twin moons shining above and the cities bustling below, Lyra and Ethan stood together, not as a princess and a human soldier, but as partners who had rewritten history. Their marriage, once a symbol of duty, had become a symbol of hope, unity, and the extraordinary power of insight. Across Zirion, stories spread of the human who had brought peace, the princess who trusted him, and the bond that had changed a world forever. And though challenges would always arise, one truth remained clear. The human beside Princess Lyra had unleashed a power no alien had ever seen, and it had transformed an entire planet.